artistry of coaching. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First up, the science practice gap. Second, what is reflective practice? Third, we'll look at the case of Coach A. Fourth, big ideas in coaching. And finally, overcoming practice barriers. All right, Section 1, the science practice gap. So there is a very clear divide in professional coaching. On one hand, we've got scientific knowledge, right? The NSCA guidelines, sets, reps, biomechanics, physiology. It's clean, it's predictable, and it's totally data-driven. But the second you step onto the gym floor, you immediately slam into practical knowledge. That's the messy, unpredictable reality of dealing with actual human athletes. The clean science just doesn't fit perfectly because, well, athletes bring their own psychological, social, and environmental baggage to the table. In fact, research actually shows that over a coach's career, they start to rely a little less on strict biomedical training programs and way more on developing trust, being adaptable, and motivating their players. So the absolute crucial question here is, how does a coach bridge that gap between pristine science and messy reality?
Moving right along to Section 2, what is reflective practice?
Okay, let's dive into this. Reflective practice, or RP for short, is our bridge. It's heavily based on the work of Schön, and it's essentially how you take technical rationality, that textbook science we just talked about, and mold it into professional artistry. Because let's face it, having experiences is easy, but your ability to actually reflect determines how you make meaning from them. It is this exact questioning of your own methods that turns a pretty good scientist into an absolutely incredible coach. To understand how this works, we look at Schön's reflective practice loop. It all kicks off with your role frame. Think of this as your personal approach, or your working theory. It's shaped by all your past experiences and, yes, your biases. So when you encounter a problem, you jump into this loop. You identify the issue through appreciation. You generate a strategy, and then you experiment. You try to fix it. If you don't get the outcome you wanted, you have to reevaluate through reappreciation. Now, Schön makes a really important distinction between two types of problems here. Single loop problems are your everyday, routine issues. They just require a quick tweak. But double loop problems, those are deep. They force you to completely tear down your preconceived assumptions and totally reframe the problem from scratch. And this whole reflective loop happens in two totally distinct timeframes. The first one is reflection in action. This is your real-time, on-the-fly problem solving. You are completely in what Schön calls the action present. Imagine a coach right in the middle of a super chaotic weight room session. They notice an athlete struggling, and boom, they adjust the workout right then and there. Your strategy can still instantly change the outcome of that session. On the flip side, we have reflection on action. This happens after the dust has completely settled. It's your post-game analysis or your pre-game strategizing. It's not going to fix a live problem, but it gives you the breathing room for deep analysis to test out entirely new strategies for the future. Which brings us to a real-world example in Section 3, the case of Coach A. Let me introduce you to Coach A. She's a strength and conditioning coach for a football team, and she reads a rock-solid scientific study. It shows that in-season strength can be maintained if her athletes lift at greater than 80% of their one-rep max. Perfect. So she implements this textbook science. But 2 weeks in, the head football coach suddenly changes the weight room schedule from before practice to after practice. And almost immediately, Coach A notices her athletes' strength is dropping. They just aren't hitting those 80% numbers. So, operating purely on a single-loop problem-solving level, she comes up with a basic strategy. She just adds more vocal motivation. She claps louder, yells a bit more, really tries to hype them up. But her standard interventions completely fail, and performance just keeps dropping.
I want you to pause for a second here. Look at the facts. The science strictly says 80% works. The coach is out there motivating them. The schedule was moved to after practice. What hidden variable is Coach A completely missing? Why is their performance still tanking?
Well, Coach A finally decides to just pull her veteran players aside and ask them to describe their level of fatigue. And to her absolute shock, they tell her they feel great. But she knows for a fact that can't be true. This sparks her massive double-loop breakthrough. She realized the players were putting on a front. They literally lied about their fatigue because the whole football culture had taught them to never, ever demonstrate weakness to a coach. The issue wasn't the 80% workout. It wasn't a new after-practice schedule. It was a fundamental lack of trust. Her athletes were actively hiding their true physical state. So, Coach A
brilliantly navigated the reflective practice loop to evolve her approach. Once she realized the root problem was a deep lack of trust rather than just a physical fatigue issue, she entirely shifted her strategy. Instead of messing with the clock or asking for verbal answers in front of the whole team, she created a completely objective, safe system. She used daily note cards where athletes could privately report their true fatigue levels. Once she solved that double-loop trust problem, the athletes finally stopped hiding how tired they were, the workouts were adjusted properly, and guess what? By the end of the season, 80% of her athletes saw actual physical strength gains on their squat and bench press. Incredible, right?
All right, let's zoom out a bit. Section 4, Big Ideas in Coaching.
Now, we mentioned earlier that how you solve a problem relies heavily on your role frame, your unique background and biases. Well, the source material highlights a pretty interesting issue. Most strength and conditioning staffs actually have surprisingly similar backgrounds. It's a phenomenon called homologous reproduction. Basically, people tend to hire people who look, act, and think exactly like them. But here's the catch. If an entire coaching staff shares the exact same role frame, they are at a huge risk of getting permanently stuck in single-loop problem solving. Increasing staff diversity is absolutely crucial because it injects entirely new role frames into the room. It sparks extended discussions on a much wider variety of problems, and that ultimately leads to improved, diverse decision-making. Simply put, different perspectives mean you catch those hidden double-loop problems way faster.
And this macro-level reflection actually extends to the entire coaching profession. Just take the NSCA Professional Standards and Guidelines as an example. The rules of American football and strength training have constantly evolved to become safer over the last century, entirely because professionals continuously engage in industry-wide reflection on action. They observe the sport, identify health and safety trends, and systematically revise these best practice guidelines. So football coaches are highly encouraged to use these standard guidelines as a regular checklist to audit their own programs. It's basically a way to use the entire industry's collective reflection to cover your own personal blind spots. Here is another massive idea that really challenges a super common coaching assumption. A lot of us tend to picture a great coach as someone who is constantly barking orders, pacing around the room, telling athletes exactly what to do every single second of practice. But the research on motor learning suggests something totally different. Simply watching and talking all the time can actually hinder skill acquisition. In fact, athletes often learn physical motor skills much better when the coach steps back and structures the environment so that the learner actually solicits the feedback themselves. Reframing your role from being a constant loud instructor to being a facilitator of an environment where athletes feel empowered to ask questions, that is a textbook example of double-loop problem-solving in action. Finally, Section 5, Overcoming Practice Barriers. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, look, I don't have the time to sit around and reflect all day, don't worry, the research offers some incredibly practical life hacks just for you. First up, use R cards. These are just large index cards where you list your performance goals for the day with a tiny blank space to quickly jot down your post-event reflections. Super fast. Second, if you need an outside perspective, hit your athletes with a simple 3-question exit survey as they leave the room. What was the purpose today? What was beneficial? And what didn't you like? Third, to overcome the barrier of assessing your own physical coaching habits, just throw on a GoPro or some wearable tech. It gives you a literal first-person point-of-view video of your coaching behaviors that you can quickly review later. And finally, if getting the whole team together for collaboration is tough, borrow a trick from the tech world, the daily scrum. Just 10 to 15 minutes a day where the staff rapid fires what they did, what they plan to do, and what barriers they see coming. Quick, easy, and highly reflective. The tools to finally bridge that gap between textbook science and human artistry are literally right in front of us. Whether it's through R cards, wearable tech, or simply asking your team better questions, reflective practice is the secret ingredient that separates the good from the truly great. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. What are your own professional blind spots? What is that one nagging, recurring problem in your work that you just keep trying to fix with a quick, single-loop tweak? And how can double-loop thinking help you completely reframe it today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.